27 words that changed everything on June 17, 2026. A man most Americans have never heard of walked to a podium in Shanghai and said 27 words. 27 words. That is it. Shorter than a tweet, quieter than a press release, and almost completely ignored by the American press. But those 27 words were not a warning. They were not a negotiating tactic. They were a declaration backed by a legal action already in motion that will reshape how the United States projects power for the next generation. The man was He Lifeng, China's vice premier. The person who runs the entire Chinese financial system and answers only to Xi Jinping. What he said was this: "We don't stir up trouble, but we're absolutely not afraid of it." And if you know what was already happening underneath that sentence, it lands like a door being shut. Beat won the man the moment, and why both matter to understand why those words hit the way they did, you have to understand who He Lifeng is inside China's power structure. He is not a spokesperson. He is not a diplomat sent to deliver a message someone else wrote. He is the head of the Central Financial Commission, a body Xi Jinping created personally in November 2023 specifically to consolidate control over China's financial system. When He Lifeng speaks at a financial forum, the message has been approved at the highest level. The words are exact. The timing is deliberate. And the timing here was almost theatrical. 9 days before He Lifeng took the stage, the United States Pentagon had added 188 Chinese companies to its military blacklist. Alibaba, Baidu, Neo, the biggest single expansion in the history of that list. Then 1 month before that, China did something it had never once done before. It invoked its blocking statute forbidding Chinese refineries from complying with American sanctions on Iranian oil. The exact legal language: the sanctions shall not be recognized, enforced, or complied with. First time ever. May 2026. He Lifeng was not improvising at that podium. He was announcing the next chapter of a story that had been years in the writing. And to understand what chapter this actually is, you have to go back to the system itself. Beat to the weapon and the wall being built against it. Picture the global financial system as a single enormous highway. Every country in the world that wants to trade, to buy, to sell, to move money, uses this highway. And for 80 years, the United States has been the one who built it, owns it, and controls access to it. That highway runs on dollars. It clears through American connected systems, and the toll booth is called Sanctions. If Washington decides you have crossed a line, it can pull you off the highway. Not just slow you down, pull you off entirely. No access to the dollar. No access to the global trading system. No access to almost anything. That power has become America's most used foreign policy tool. There are currently more than 12,000 entities under active U.S. sanctions. That number has grown 60% since 2018. A tool that used to be used surgically in extreme cases, with broad international support, is now used routinely, often unilaterally, and against targets that include some of the largest economies on Earth. What He Lifeng announced is China's answer to the toll booth. Embedded inside a new financial law, Article 85 is the legal authority for China to impose its own countermeasures against any country that takes what Beijing calls discriminatory restrictions against Chinese companies or citizens in the financial sector. The law is already in public comment. The legal infrastructure is being built right now. Here is what that creates in practice. Take a European bank, Deutsche Bank, BNP Paribas, any major institution with operations in both the United States and China. Under American law, it must comply with U.S. sanctions or lose dollar access. Under China's incoming law, if it complies with sanctions that Beijing deems unfair, it faces Chinese countermeasures. It cannot satisfy both. It cannot ignore either. It is caught between two systems that are now pulling in opposite directions. That is not an accident. That is the architecture of the wall being built. Beat 3 the moment China decided to build a door out. To understand why China feels ready to do this now, you have to go back to a single weekend in February 2022. Russia had just invaded Ukraine. Within 48 hours, the United States and Europe made a decision that no one had ever made before in modern history. They froze the Russian central bank's foreign exchange reserves. Not a company, not an oligarch. The central bank of a sovereign nation. Approximately $300 billion, most of it held in Europe, locked overnight. The message was clear, and it was intentional. If your foreign policy crosses a line Washington draws, the money you thought you owned is no longer yours. Beijing watched that happen. And Beijing has $3.44 trillion in foreign exchange reserves, more than 10 times what Russia had when the freeze happened. The largest such reserves in the world, sitting inside a system that had just demonstrated it could lock them away without warning. So China did what any rational actor does when they realize the ground beneath them is less solid than they thought. They started building somewhere else to stand. The first move was gold. China has been buying it for 14 consecutive months. Not quietly aggressively. In 2023 alone, they purchased 225 tons, more than any other central bank that year. Gold cannot be frozen. Gold does not travel through SWIFT. Gold does not care about sanctions. The second move was Treasury bonds. China has been selling them steadily, reducing its holdings to approximately $651 billion as of April 2026, the lowest in 17 years. Each sale is a withdrawal from the system. The third move was CIPS, China's own interbank payment network, its alternative to the Western clearing system. In 2024, transaction volume through CIPS grew 43%. By early 2026, daily volume was averaging $134 billion. It is still smaller than its Western counterpart. But it is no longer experimental. It works. The fourth move was bilateral deals, currency swap agreements with Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Iran, the UAE, India, and Indonesia. Trade that used to require dollars now settles in yuan. Each agreement removes one more transaction from the dollar highway. He Lifeng's speech at the Lujiazui Forum was not the beginning of this strategy. It was China signaling that it is far enough along to stop being quiet about it. Beat for the casualties nobody is talking about, but here is the part of this story that gets lost when it becomes a geopolitical headline, and it is worth slowing down for. In late 2025, the United States imposed new secondary sanctions on Chinese banks accused of helping Russia move money around the existing sanctions. Several regional Chinese banks shut down their Russian settlement operations entirely. Two of them were eventually removed from the sanctions list, but only after they had already cut every tie with Russia. The mechanism worked. The American lever still had reach. This is not a clean story of one empire rising and another falling. It is messier than that. The dollar system still has enormous gravitational pull. CIPS is real, but it is not SWIFT. The bilateral yuan agreements are significant, but the dollar still settles roughly 88% of global foreign exchange transactions. China is not walking away from the dollar system. It is building a parallel door, because having a door out changes your negotiating position even if you never use it. The real casualties of this escalation are not in Washington or Beijing. They are sitting in boardrooms in Frankfurt and London and Paris, trying to figure out how to operate in a world where two systems are now demanding their loyalty simultaneously. The market's reaction to He Lifeng's speech told the story quietly but clearly. The yuan strengthened. Chinese bank stocks ticked up in Hong Kong. Gold moved, and the Chinese stock market stayed almost entirely calm, which is the most revealing signal of all. Domestic investors were not surprised. They already knew this was coming. The Lujiazui Forum was the public announcement, not the decision. Washington's response was scattered. The Treasury Department said it was reviewing the announcement. The State Department called it concerning. Senators described it as everything from economic warfare to a sign of confusion. There is no unified American strategy here because for a decade, the approach to China has been reactive. Sanctions, blacklists, export controls, each one a response to the last move, without a clear picture of where this ends. Beat 5 what this is really about. Zoom out for a moment. Because this is not really about He Lifeng. It is not even really about China. The United States built the global financial system after World War II. It designed the rules. It built the infrastructure. It maintained the reserve currency. And for 80 years, The deal it offered the world was essentially this: operate inside our system, and you get stability, liquidity, and access to global trade. The rules will be predictable. The system will be open. Sanctions changed the terms of that deal. Slowly at first, then faster. When you freeze $300 billion in sovereign central bank reserves, even Russia's, even in response to something as clearly wrong as a land invasion of a neighboring country, you are telling every other country in the world something they cannot unhear. The system is not neutral. It is conditional. And the conditions can change overnight. That is the moment the trust broke. Not because the sanction was wrong, but because it demonstrated that the highway can be closed without notice, at the discretion of one country, for reasons that country alone determines. China heard that. And China has been quietly, methodically, without ever fully announcing it, building an alternative. Not to replace the system, to reduce its exposure to the system, to reach a point where being cut off from the dollar highway would hurt, but would not be fatal. That point is getting closer, not because China has won some economic war, but because the perception is shifting, and in financial systems, perception is almost everything. The moment enough countries believe there is a credible alternative, the alternative becomes more credible. The moment the sanction lever feels shorter, its deterrent effect weakens. And a deterrent that no longer deters is not a tool. It is a gesture. Close, the quiet moments history turns on empires do not collapse on dramatic days. They don't fall during the speeches everyone remembers, or the events the cameras chase. They shift on quiet afternoons when a man most people have never heard of walks to a podium and says 27 words. And the people who are watching most carefully, not journalists, not politicians, but central bankers and finance ministers in Riyadh and Brasilia and Jakarta, write something down and make a phone call. Underneath the surface right now, the legal language is being finalized. The clearing systems are being tested. The gold is being moved. The Treasury bonds are being sold. The bilateral agreements are being signed. Each one of those moves is small on its own. Each one is also irreversible. The question worth sitting with tonight is not whether China's parallel system will succeed. It is simpler and more important than that. It is whether the system the United States built, the one that has underpinned 80 years of global trade and American power, can remain the world's only system once someone has built a credible door out of it. Because doors do not have to be used to change everything. They just have to exist.